Hello everyone, welcome back to some Call of Duty DFS action. February 2nd, Major 2 in Boston should be a pretty interesting event. I believe we'll only get 2 DFS slates, as we kind of typically do from these LAN events. But should be pretty interesting nonetheless. Starting off with a 4-gamer in the upper bracket. Checking out odds off the bat, all pretty sensible matchups. We don't have any too big of a favorite. I don't think anywhere. So it should be pretty exciting. I think these are some pretty solid matchups across the board. So you're gonna have some spots to look forward to, I think. The only big distinction here is obviously we are headed to LAN. The in-person environment. Things do change. Obviously, when you eliminate the connection aspect of the game, especially in a game like Call of Duty where small engagements are happening so quickly, so often, that those small differences do make a difference and add up. And obviously, that's one thing here. So we're gonna start off quickly by kind of running through, I think, some of the big names that changed from Major 1 to Major 1 qualifiers to Major 1. So this for some reason I have it like inverted, so the more negative the better. So the players who did the best going from LAN or online to LAN, these are the best players who had a big gap in performance positively are Havoc Skies, Nero, Kleenex, Proloot, Arcides, Priesta, Octane, Shotzi, Simp, maybe Pred, TJ, Bance. I would say the list kind of gets a big gap or a big drop off. I think somewhere around there. I think Mac is one of the players who does typically perform better on LAN. That's something to keep in mind as well. Like some of these are just kind of expected. Like I feel like that's something we noticed all year. Last year was Mac performing much better on LAN. The Macamal. These are some of the players who did much worse. Starting at the bottom, obviously Awakening, but again, he only played one series, I believe. I don't know the context of the situation, but they ended up having to use a sub, so that made a substitute. So that made a big difference. But as we see, Major Maniac did much worse. Asim fell off, but he kind of fell off a lot overall. Paulex, Slasher, Celium did a lot worse, which is pretty atypical. Standy, Draza, Clayster, Cammy, Afro ended up performing a little bit worse. Methods came down a little bit. Kenny, the list is there, but Insight is the only player who performed exactly as well online as he did on LAN, and Hook did as well, but he was with LAG, obviously now with Object Texas. So I would have put too much stock into this, except for these large outliers like how we see with Major Maniac, Asim, Paulex, maybe some of these bigger improvements, like I think Havoc, Skies, Nero, maybe Kleenex, maybe Proloot, maybe Arcides, maybe Priesta. Obviously, we've seen with Priesta, he's kind of come into his own a lot online as well. So I wouldn't put too much in stock into these. These are only numbers from one event. I like looking at the comparisons of LAN and online after we have at least like a second major under our belt. That way we can kind of have a better grasp. But for the most part, these teams should have at least a couple series, which should add some context to it. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and get started talking about the first series, New York versus Minnesota. So this is going to be a pretty interesting matchup. Off the bat, obviously, we had a pretty good run of reading Minnesota or New York and Minnesota kind of at the end of the qualifiers. But now we get them heading on to LAN, of course, where things do get a little bit different. Honestly, to kind of sum up where I'm at with a lot of these games and stuff, I could see a lot of these series going really either way. So I'm not going to have a lot of conviction in these picks. If you guys disagree with them, I definitely wouldn't argue with them on much of them. I think there is one series here that I actually do have a pretty solid, maybe two series that I have a pretty solid stance on. But especially this New York, Minnesota one, I find it very intriguing, both sides of this. You could definitely make a good case that if you do think that, like, you have New York here as a minus 240, Minnesota at a plus 180. If I feel like this is a pretty, if I feel like this is a pretty close series and you have one side that is like a relatively big favorite, then you should probably just go with the underdog. I think that logic does make sense, and it probably is a little bit of a better way to do things. But honestly, I don't know. The big problem, or the big difference here for me, was just the performance that we saw from the Minnesota players and the New York players going from LAN to online. Obviously, New York did win the first major, so their numbers are going to be a tad bit inflated, but nonetheless, they are kind of the consensus number one team. They won the first LAN. It's very difficult. We've rarely seen these teams repeat. We saw that all last year. I think we saw like Toronto, New York. I feel like Seattle won a major. I don't know. I feel like every major was won by a different team, I feel like. So I would be pretty surprised to see New York repeat. But do I think they're going to lose in the first round? That seems like a little bit of a stretch. I don't know. This series does feel tough. It feels like it's a solid place for that you could go kind of any spot, really. The pricing does matter here a lot. Obviously, we have Hydra all the way up at 11.4, but when you look at the key names from Minnesota, they're much cheaper. Afro at 6.6, Bance at 4.2 seems criminal, Attach at 8.2. I don't think you'd ever get to Cammy, especially at that price tag, but Priesta at 6.2 is underpriced. I feel like Skies at 7.4 is underpriced, but Kismet and Hydra feel a little bit overpriced at their tags. So I think you could definitely construct pretty much from any side here. I think obviously the savings that you get from going from Minnesota, I think if the players I like to go for on Minnesota would be Afro and Bance, and they're at 6.6 and 4.2K. That is pretty absurd, like savings you're getting there. So I don't know. It's tough. I think you could definitely make a case either way. I'm probably going to go I am going to side with Minnesota here. I think I am going to make that my official pick, but this is one I do not feel great in. I could definitely see a wide range of outcomes. I just don't feel like I do want to fade New York, but it feels a little bit preemptive to do so. Although I do like Minnesota, and I do like them at the price to win the LAN. I think they can win it. I just think at the number that they're getting, it's a pretty solid spot, but obviously, we saw both these teams be pretty solid when it comes to the respawn game modes. Minnesota, I think, obviously started peaking a little bit more towards the end. New York was a little bit up and down. I think the big difference here is that New York, during the Stage 2 qualifiers, they lost to FaZe, they lost to Seattle, but they beat up on LA Thieves, I believe, who didn't have their full roster. Florida is pretty weak. Vegas Legion are pretty weak. I just feel like we saw Minnesota beat Seattle. They beat FaZe. Like, I know a little bit of MMA math here. Like, I don't want to say, oh, Minnesota's better because they beat the teams that beat New York. That's not how it works. But I feel like they at least had a little bit more of a gauntlet to justify their record being about the same. So I'm going to go with Minnesota. I just feel like this is a close series. New York probably shouldn't be this large of a favorite, in my opinion. And the pricing is just pretty crazy here. I feel like Afro at 6.6, maybe Attach at 8.2, maybe Bance at 4.2. You could make a case for any of those guys. So that's the direction I'm going to go. I'm not going to overcomplicate it too much. But if you wanted to go with the New York guys, I think Priesta and Skies and Hydra are all very, very much in the conversation as well. Looking at who I'd go to from Minnesota, I think it probably would be Afro, then in the second tier, either Bance or Attach. I feel like Bance, the fact that he has the peak games, obviously his hard point is much better. Attach is just like a little bit of a slower AR player, and I don't love those in my lineups. They just feel like if they have a neutral game, I'd rather have my neutral SMG go 25 and 25 as opposed to like a neutral slower assault rifle player go like 18 and 18. That's a 7-point gap there, even though the kill death ratio is the same. Again, you get 3 points for a kill, 2 points for a death. So even if you have the same amount of kills as deaths, I'd rather have you have more kills than deaths. That's kind of what it comes down to for me. So for that reason, then my tiebreaker will be Bance over Attach. But we've definitely seen attach, especially. I shouldn't have closed the tweet here, but I'll get it back up here real quick. I believe we saw attach be the one of the players who was actually better on LAN. Nope. Attach was one of the players who did worse, and we saw. Do we see Ban? Yeah, Ban's got a slight improvement, so maybe that would be the direction I would go. But again, we've seen some high performances from Bance, so he wouldn't be, or from Attach, so I wouldn't X him out by any means. But yeah, I don't know, I spent a long time on this series, but yeah, that's kind of the direction I'm going. I'm going to slightly lean towards the Minnesota side. Up next is Boston versus Atlanta. This is a pretty interesting matchup for sure. I'm definitely think this is one that's pretty much in the same category in my opinion. I think you could definitely make a solid case kind of going any direction here. I just feel like FaZe's still kind of getting a little bit too much credit. I think they're getting a little bit too much name value credit here. I don't want to put too much stock into looking at these numbers between LAN and online because the sample size is not that large. But I feel like the fact that we saw Nero jump up pretty dramatically does indicate some things. Obviously, we saw Boston perform much worse the last LAN because of the Awakening substitution situation. I feel like they're going to be coming back a little bit better here. Again, we saw some pretty bad numbers, I think, from the Atlanta FaZe side, both in the in this list here. We see Abizi going down a little bit. We see Celium going down a little bit. We see Simp going down a little bit. Actually, we see Simp in the positives, don't we? Yeah, Simp was pretty good, actually. I think Slasher was one of the worst ones when it came to LAN, which is surprising, but I just feel like FaZe are getting a little bit too much credit here, so I am going to go with the second underdog in a row here in Boston. Again, I think this team is one where you're willing a little bit more to spend that money for Awakening. Again, his numbers have not been ideal on LAN, but again, that's one series. I'm not putting stock into that really at all. We know how much of a beast he can be. Obviously, when it comes to who you want to, I don't know if you necessarily even want a second Boston player, honestly. I guess if I were to get one, I'm not sure. Maybe it would be, I think it would either be Vivid or Nero, in my opinion. Just again, I do like these quicker, when it comes down to the tiebreakers, I do like the quicker SMG players just because if they do go neutral a little bit, it can kind of go either way. I think Vivid, especially in the last 2 or 3 series, he's been much, much better as well. But again, the gap here from Nero could definitely be something where if you wanted to hop onto this Nero train a little bit before everyone else, then that's definitely an option that you could look into. So that's something you could do. So I guess my rankings would be Awakening, kind of on a tier of his own. I feel like if you're playing Boston, you kind of have to play Awakening. Then it would be either Vivid or Nero, maybe Methods. I don't think you could make a case for any of them, but it would probably be Vivid, then Nero, then Methods, in my opinion. But looking, again, on the FaZe side, if you wanted to go Celium, Abizi, those definitely make a lot of sense. Those two guys have been pretty solid players. This team is definitely very good. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They've definitely been pretty solid. But they have been dropping stuff here and there, and obviously we know Boston's pedigree and respawn is there. I just feel like FaZe are getting a little bit too much name credit here. After picking a couple underdogs here, I'm going to go with a little bit of chalk in this series of going LAG versus Toronto. I am going to be siding with the Toronto side, the relatively decently sized favorite here. I feel like they, again, are a team that's, in there to win it. Obviously, they're one of the betting favorites, I believe. I think the main thing here is, again, we kind of look at the respawn game modes. It's how we want to view through the lens of Call of Duty. Toronto 5-0 in control. LAG 0-5 in control. So I feel like we're getting like a guaranteed respawn game mode map victory there. Then obviously in Hardpoint, LAG is 8-2. That's very solid. Toronto 5-3. That's not great, but it's still fine. And I feel like if they go in like 1-1 in Hardpoints and then they win that control, I could definitely see like a pretty solid Toronto victory here, and I just feel like Toronto is one of these teams that's like just going to be a lot better on land. Obviously, LAG have a lot of young pieces as well, so I feel like that's definitely something that's a little bit problematic. Obviously, we see the 3 LAG Academy players kind of come up, and they did perform well online. So I can't. I don't know. It does feel a little bit tough, but we've definitely seen it with these young guys. The difference that they get from LAN to online is pretty dramatic sometimes. So for that reason, I'm still going to be going with Toronto. LAG have just, they've been solid. It's hard to argue with that, but you have these young guys going to LAN for the first time in, Assault, I think it's definitely been there. But Exceed and Cod Dfs is not, I don't think that they've been to LAN too much. So I just feel like it should heavily lean towards the Toronto side, I guess, what I'm trying to say, but failing to do so pretty bad. I don't think there's too many big outliers when it comes to these online versus LAN performances. CleanX does stand out, getting a 0.22 kill death ratio boost. Let's see. Anyone else here really? Not really. Standy does kind of drop down a little bit. Scrappy dropped down a little bit, but again, I think they kind of just played pretty poorly. Actually, they didn't do too bad at the LAN, so I don't know. That is pretty interesting that their numbers were down a decent bit, but either way, I'm definitely looking at Scrappy, Standy, Insight. I don't know. We'll look at the players more so overall at the end, but either way, I think it would probably be Standy and Scrappy for me. Maybe CleanX, maybe Insight. I think you could definitely make a case for like all 4 players here, which is a very unique case, and that's one of the reasons why I do like the team overall, is just because when you do look at the players, if CleanX's numbers are that much better on LAN, and he also has help from the rest of the squad, like I feel like they don't really have that much of a weakness when it comes to the players here. I definitely do like this player. I like getting a 2-man here from here. Again, you could kind of mix and match anywhere you want. I do think it would be probably Standy, Scrappy, then kind of the top 2, and then probably Insight and CleanX as like a bottom 2. But again, I think you could definitely mix and match any 4 of them. Pricing wise, nothing crazy here. Scrappy and Standy are definitely a little bit overpriced. Insight at 7.8 and CleanX at 6,000 feel pretty decent. Again, for the reasons I just mentioned, why I think they're valid options. I think Cod Dfs at 7K feels pretty underpriced considering the numbers he's been putting up online, I should say. So, those make sense for me. But, if I'm getting all these salary saving options from the likes of Boston and Minnesota, I'd like to spend it somewhere. And obviously, I think spending it here would make a good bit of sense in my opinion. So that's the direction I'm thinking from that series. The final series up here is Texas versus LAT. This is a pretty interesting one. Obviously, we have the return of Kenny in the full LA Thieves roster. We have Optic Texas, who coming off the back of beating Atlanta FaZe, and Dashy's very, very solid performance. He's definitely kind of on the comeback there. So pretty interesting. This series is going to be one where I'm probably going to be a little exposed to. I think this is a pretty close one. I think this is 2 solid veteran teams. Not a lot to love in this one, in my opinion. I just have a hard gauge on this one. I think my initial lean is towards the Optic Texas side, just because I feel like when we have watched these LA Thieves series, although they do make these respawn game modes pretty competitive, I feel like they do so in a non-DFS way, and that's just something where I'm not going to be loving it unless their matchup is very solid. So for me, it is going to be I am going to be leaving this match in the bin a little bit. I feel like at most all I'm really getting is 1 piece or so. Like, I just don't love either side here too much. So I am going to be going probably with the Optic Texas side. But I think it's mainly just going to be like Dashy or nothing. Maybe like a Shotzi or something. Again, Dashy's price is up there, so it does feel a little bit tough if I do want to go with like Dashy, Scrappy, and Standy or something. I'm probably going to have to leave off one of them somewhere. But I just feel like considering how insanely well Dashy's been playing lately, that I just want to get a part of it, and I don't feel like the LA Thieves side is too scary. I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of just talking in circles, but I feel like I've kind of got all I'm trying to say out here. So I'm going with Optic Texas, but I don't feel confident in it. This is more so just a play of I want to get Dashy into my lineups because I feel like he's been playing that well, and I feel like when you get somebody like him who's just been frying the way he has, you just kind of want to get him into your lineups, and that's just the direction I'm headed. So yeah, that'll be it from me. We'll quickly kind of look at the group of players overall that I'm thinking of. But I feel like we have a decent idea of what we're getting from the players so far, that we have so far. We'll look at stage 2 just because it's more recent, but you could definitely look at maybe stage 1 LAN statistics if that's the direction you want to go. Let's get Boston, Minnesota, Toronto, Texas. Obviously, no scump in here. Yep, looking good there. Again, I think definitely Cammy would be one I would leave off here. I think this would probably be relatively, indicative of what we were just talking about. I think Awakening, Afro, Scrappy. I don't love Insight just because his activity isn't very high, but his numbers have actually been rising, so definitely you could go that direction. But Awakening, Afro, Scrappy, Insight, Standy. 3 Toronto players in that clump there between Scrappy, Insight, and Standy. Then you have Dashy, of course. Methods, although again his KD is a little bit high, his action is pretty low. Bance is definitely on the rise there. He's definitely somebody I'm interested in, especially at that insane price tag he's at. Attach, Vivid are kind of on the fringe there. Then you have some of these other guys like Illy, Hook, Shotzi. I don't love Nero, Kleenex. Again, we talked about Nero. He's kind of interesting dart throw if you want to go that direction, but again, not somebody I'm trying to prioritize at all. So yeah, I think that's the direction I'm going to be headed. I think it's going to be a pretty fun game. I definitely don't have a lot of confidence in this slate. I could definitely see a lot of these series going either way. So I'm not going too crazy. I think this is definitely a good slate if you wanted to get a lot of different directions and lineups. If you are that type of player, I think this is a pretty good option to do so. I think there's a lot of good dart throws if you want to get unique and look at somebody like Nero, like Kleenex, I don't know, like Bance, those type of players, get them into your lineups. We know that the upside and potential that they do have. So if you wanted to go that direction, I think that makes a good bit of sense. So I think overall that'll be it for me today. I think I'll see you guys all again tomorrow, probably at a similar time and stuff. So hopefully we can have a good day and do it again tomorrow. I think again 2 days is typically all we get from LAN, so that'll be it. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you guys all tomorrow.